In your webinar about shame, in the first part, you were talking about that in the end, every experience is love and bliss and light. And I really loved this. But life gave me a new boss, and he is a devotee of this guy who did The Secret. So he's completely on positive thinking all the time. And this is for me very challenging because I want to be finished with positive thinking. And I'm very, very tired of this. And in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a part where Arjuna looks in Krishna's mouth. And first, he sees the beauty of this creation. And he very beautiful. Then he sees the bad side. And he cannot face it. So my question is how to face the pure negativity of this creation, or to perceive it as light.
The thing is that we cannot perceive things as they are. We can only perceive things as we are. So, this is the first, if you will, understanding. This understanding which serves as an adjustment. And of course, if one somehow sees this in or through these tainted lenses, tainted glasses of what here good and bad represents, and how we apply this understanding, this polarity, then this may bring a sense of deep emotional discontent, because we do perceive wickedness, injustice, right? We perceive a lot of things in others and in ourselves. When it happens in relation to ourselves, then this can be seen as a sort of a purifying process, right? So it has this element of acknowledgement, acknowledging, not denying, accepting, acknowledging. We could even say that the growth of a psyche, development, psychological development, includes this. We can observe that in our children, grandchildren, or we can observe that if we cast back our attention in terms of how we grew up and how we used to encounter this, how that, well, what was okay at the age of 7, no longer okay at the age of 15, right? There's a much more awareness, presumably, hopefully. So whatever may be excused to a 5-year-old, then will not be excused to a 9-year-old, and this is normal. This is a very, very normal state of affairs. In the same way, psyche also grows continuously. So some portions that of our psychological wholeness may remain to be hidden from view, and we act, but not always have this access to how that is until there's more awareness, there's more consciousness. So in relation to ourselves, this is, let's say, covered, but we still perceive that in the others. We still perceive that in the world. So if this tantric axiom is taken, right, I'm the world and the world is me, right? Or I'm the self and the world is, one and the same, then it begins to bring these challenging perspectives that, well, if I perceive this, that I perceive that on the account of being able to recognize them, that means that this is what taints my perception somehow. But this is where distinction needs to be clearly made. Distinction in the sense that at every respective level of awareness, there are values, corresponding values. And these corresponding values, if you will, are or hold their value only at these respective levels. So if everything is seen through that non-dual eye of oneness, then everything is reconciled there. So there is no such thing. It's impossible to speak about good or bad. It simply doesn't make any sense. So therefore, of course, this is often spoken of as that purified vision, often spoken of as that untainted vision of oneness, when we behold the world as our own self in totality. And in that, these qualities, they no longer play themselves out the way they do at other respective levels of creation and other respective level of consciousness. So this distinction needs to be made, and this will, by the way, allow us to go back to what we have spoken earlier when we spoke about the upayas, because this will make more sense when we will go back to that discourse. But just before we go there, because in your question there is this also element, how to, what was it exactly? You said that
I'm tired of positive thinking,
yeah,
and how to perceive negativity.
mm-hmm. And then what was it? Yes, tired from positive thinking, and what else that you added? That was how to face the negativity in the world, right?
Or myself and my thoughts.
Yeah, how to face the negativity. In a way, this is a question of culture as well. One way or the other, we cannot speak about this without bringing this element of culture, culturing. So, if we just dismiss this now and only give that overall blanket of unifying quality, where everything is irreconciled, everything is completely, every quality is reabsorbed back into that state of oneness where it is undifferentiated. And of course, the vintage point here is only this. Vintage point here is a human being. And yet we also speak about it. Who is human being? Right? Human being is nothing other than awareness in disguise. From the vintage point of view of awareness, there is nothing other than awareness. there are many, many different points of view about the sun as the shining heavenly body. Many different points of view, right? This planet has that perspective, this planet has that perspective, right? We could just say there's the different perspectives throughout the day, and then the sun is no longer there. Then we have reflected awareness or reflected rays of the sun shining, bouncing on the surface of the moon. But just for a moment, imagine there is no perspective for the sun itself. The perspective from the point of view of the sun, everything is nothing other than its own luminosity. Everything is irreconciled. Absolutely everything. Everything is just molten back into the state of that original luminosity. But then we have this also point of view of actions and interactions, and this is the question of culture comes in. And therefore, in integral traditions, in traditions that withstood the test of time, it has different levels. It has different levels of application. So these spiritual texts, they would have to be applicable to anyone with any level of consciousness. So that if a simple folk reads that, then they will be instructed in a way that would assist them into living their life. When a learned scholar will read it, that will also instruct them, when someone who is more educated, and so forth. We spoke about it earlier. And with all this, within this lofty non-dual traditions, right? If you read Brahma Sutras, nothing is spoken about negativity or positivity. It's a philosophical doctrine. If many other scriptures you read, there's nothing that you will never encounter this psychological repercussions of how this and that sits, because it's a very different purpose. It's a very different purpose. Hopefully, we somehow understand that these treasures of wisdom, pearls of wisdom, diamonds of wisdom, fall into the hands of those who are highly evolved. Highly evolved means cultured. Cultured in the sense of what we speak now, in terms of knowing about these universally acknowledged virtues. So to secure that, of course, there are these, if you will, myths, this lore that speaks of the creation where everything is being held in that state of balance. And so obviously at the subtler level of creation there are some forms of energy, and maybe spoken in this, let's say if we speak of Hindu tradition, or the basis where what Hindu tradition is based on, Hinduism is based on Vedic, right? Vedic sciences, and it's Hinduism as a religion is a very rich in a sense, because it's like the democratic way of choosing oneself, one's own relationship with the divine. And within that tradition there is this very rich lore. So these creatures known as devas and asuras, right? So those of you who may not have heard about this or read about this, devas are these shining divine beings, right? They're the beings of light. And asuras are the beings of darkness. It's as simple as that. And they constantly quarrel, they constantly battle, they're constantly in a state of war. At the beginning of creation, somewhere, the very, very early phases of creation, there is this myth where both were involved in churning the ocean of being by holding gigantic serpent, Sesha. one asuras held it at the tail and the devas held it at the head. And they churned the ocean of creation for that nectar of immortality. So the legend goes that they've done this job, right, under the supervision of the aspect of divine intelligence responsible for preservation, Vishnu, his name. So Vishnu promised that if asuras behave in this enterprise, then they will get the Amritam. But because the job of Vishnu to preserve evolution, he knows that evolution can only be preserved by these so-called positive divine beings. So at the moment the nectar reappeared, gathered to the surface, right? And he deflected the attention, or somehow the attention of asuras was on something else, and devas took the Amritam and give it a Rana. So, of course, they were very upset because Vishnu broke his promise. And they became vicious with their revenge. You can imagine, right? They did a tremendous job, they were working very hard. Okay, they're beings of darkness, but hey, where's fairness? So, these myths, this lore contains profound wisdom of the way the universal laws are arranged at a certain level. You see? In a way, if you really trace this attentively, there is a certain karma created, even by these shinier beings. See? They're nice beings, but they are very involved in the act of treachery. Boom, boom. Did the work together, but gathered the goods and ran away with it. See? So you have to pay. Karmically, one way or the other. You have to pay. So this is the myth, the creational myth, speaks of this, if you will, underlying structures, where even at that subtler level, there are these beings of light and beings of darkness. Furthermore, if you apply this understanding that every scriptural reference, every myth somehow has to be applicable to us human beings. So it's not far from this possibility that these devas and asuras actually are the ones that make the, go to make that what we consider ourselves. So in other words, human being itself is a gathering place of energies, extremely refined as well, because for perceptual capacity of this degree, right? I mean, let's face it, like, yes, we all love trees, and right, some people like, give human rights to cats, right? Or dogs, like everyone is like monkeys, horses, right? Whales, dolphins. Of course, every creature is lovely. But there's no creature like human being, let's face it, right? I yet to hear monkeys compose requiem, right? With all the intelligence. When we see monkey putting boxes and climbing to get banana, we are almost ecstatic in the intelligence. So it's also peculiar to us humans to project that humane qualities on anything we look at. This is not to belittle in any way any other forms of creation, but it is here that consciousness emulates absolutely everything. Humans can swim, run, fly, and gazillion of other things, paint, compose, right, perceive, and do a lot of other things just for the sake of it. So this arena, this gathering, must be of very, very important symposium. There's something else going on other than just, just this or that. It's not a dry affair of, any physiological explanation of how human organism functions is a pale replica of the sliver of what's going on. And one of this perspective is that, in fact, a human being is also that fertile ground where that amritam is being churned, you see? So this is where that creational myth, not necessarily something that took place in point in time, but taking place here and now. So that ocean of being is being churned here as we speak. And who here will end up having that froth, having that cream, is another story. So in other words, this is where without any hesitation, this loftiest of perennial traditions, although monistic in their essence, they all speak of the necessity of maintaining the dharma, and dharma can only be maintained by virtuous acts. Therefore, we align ourselves with that what is inherently good. What inherently here is then expressed in, let's say, as a certain kind of code of conduct, as certain commandments, right? As certain laws, right? Because these laws, they support that foundational ground where the beings of light are being nourished and given, if you will, simply a given preference in terms of evolutionary spin. This is where maybe modern spirituality stumbles and struggles, because modern, I'm speaking of the non-duality, that because it doesn't know what to do with values. It doesn't know how the virtues fit in. On one hand, there is, from the point of view of oneness, there is no such thing as, this is better than, because it's simply inconsistent with what this is all about, right? At best, we could speak about this with this assistance of that understanding that it's for the sake of the playful sport. So the challenge is in that playful sport, otherwise it will not be sport at all. So it has to be entertaining. It has to have the crescendo, it has to have the catharsis, it has to have this and that. People bewildered, of course, with various examples of, what about the calamity? And what about, you talk about Ananda, whatever. In California, you speak about Ananda and people immediately bring about, like, what about all the calamities? What about Auschwitz? What about, genocides? What about, all that, you see? So in other words, yes, of course. But this is, in a way, a test for that intelligence as well. Test for the intelligence of, how can one find oneself being confronted with the paradox and yet remain in a state of non-judgment? How can one be confronted with extraordinary display of disparity, right? Terrifying display, and yet not be pulled towards judgment? So this is the maturity of a psyche. When someone is psychologically able to face these paradoxes, one, we could say, or we could presuppose, is fit to really, really see how things all sit together. Because otherwise there is a very strong propensity for what now you've expressed certain sense of irritation towards positive thinking. Because positive thinking in itself, it's a tiptoeing, whereas one should walk with feet firmly planted on the ground, with full contact. Tiptoeing is a very unsteady, very unbalanced state. And how long can you do that? You get tired and you fall down anyway. So this positive thinking, of course, need to be understood more in terms of that what the myth, creational myth represents here. It's, maybe we could mention here some of these Christian sayings: see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. What does it represent here? What does it mean? It's not the state of denial of the existence of the heartbreaking display of injustice in the world. It's not a state of denial. But if it comes from a place of conscious decision to align towards the light, to align towards the goodness, that one can transform the most negative energies within oneself. And ultimately speaking, all traditions also have within their mythologies, within their lore, these final encounters. These encounters, like the final temptations of Christ, right? The last temptations. You know, the last temptations of the Buddha. These canonical examples of being faced with one's ultimate shadow. Being faced with one's ultimate, let's say, opposing energy of that what we consider now universally as goodness. So in short, to make it simple, right? Unless we really face the Lucifer within, we're beating about the bush. We're going around the circles. We're not really faced nothing within. Because that reconciliation can only happen here. If I'm able to face the utmost evil within myself, I can face it in the world and not being distraught, destroyed, swayed or converted by it. Why? Because I'm fully aware that it's a byproduct of my own awareness. At a certain level of creation, it is required. Why? It's another story. This is how different traditions deal with this. Being spiritual or aligning oneself towards serious spiritual work begins with being confronted with paradoxes. Avoiding paradoxes means one avoiding real work. So it's facing these paradoxes where the breakthroughs begin to happen. So how to face the negativity? You face it squarely, as it is, without drawing the line of judgment. Even if we may say something, we may say in a casual discourse, in a casual exchanges, we may express our opinion. When at some point in the political history of United States, George W. Bush became president. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi called him Rakshasa. Out into the televised, for thousands and thousands of people. He just called him Rakshasa. Right? Rakshasas are also like asuras, Rakshasas. These are really not very nice creatures. They constantly fight, with beings of light. Like whenever puja is being made, they throw some rubbish at it. And some people may like, oh my God, how can Maharishi in a state of unity call someone Rakshasa? Well, at that level of speech, at that level of expression, it felt fitting. But if you ask Maharishi there and then, in quiet, is he really Rakshasa? No, he's nothing other than Brahman, because there's nothing other than Brahman. But imagine if Maharishi would say, oh, George W. Bush, goes to bomb this country, on the pretexts on false pretenses. Well, he's Brahman. It doesn't make any sense. So this is where culturing comes in. Culturing. We have to culture ourselves. This is why this question, when it was posed to me by Tomadatta a few years ago, if all this is oneness, what's there to do? So I said it's virtuous and vigilance. So know that it's all one, but build virtues and be vigilant. It's our job. It's our job to maintain that balance, and to maintain that balance so that the nectar doesn't end up in the hands of the asuras. Because we live in time that there is perhaps this possibility happening, that in a lot of human beings, the asuric realm already won. In a lot of human beings, the asuras already enjoying the victory. So in other words, we don't need to have David Icke telling us about, reptilian race, cohabiting with some extraterrestrial race. No, we don't need to. It's simply on the level of energy. Yes, this field, this human field, this dharma, field of dharma, right? This is where these forces of light and darkness meet and collide. You see? Philosophical scriptures, tantric scriptures, are, if you will, always deal, or the structure is around the dialogue between Parvati and Shiva, right? But other scriptures, like these all Hindu-based scriptures, they have leitmotif in the form of a battle. Whether it's Ramayana or Mahabharata, there is a battle, final battle, where all forces, the whole universe polarized. You cannot be neutral. So much is at stake, then everything is mobilized. So, this is not a trivial affair. Therefore, don't worry about positive thinking as a kind of, I have to maintain that positive thinking. I have to maintain. Align yourself towards the light, always. Align yourself towards the light. Know that there is the opposite of that. Know that temptation is always there. Know that it's always there because it's energy, it's a form of energy. But alignment is alliance. You see this alliance, you create that alliance. And like increases like. Like increases like. So, if you want to add to that.
Well, to live a virtuous in life, there is a task in life very helpful, Svadharma. And not only me, I see lots of people struggling to find a Svadharma. And I asked you this question in London, and you said something like, don't worry too much, in the mystic path, one day it will fit. And last week I heard discourse of Swami Dayananda Giri, who spoke with you in Vienna. And he made my mind very puzzled, because he gave a definition of karma yoga, And the definition I knew, like whatever comes, take it as prasad. He said, this is fine, but it's for beginners. Actually, karma yoga starts when you get an immersion from whatever, where your swadharma get translated to you or transmitted to you. And is it in Tantra also that from somewhere you get a swadharma and then you know what to do? Because if you in daily life don't know where to put your energy, you get confused. And then the asuras come also.
Okay. When I spoke to you in London, if you remember, I'm not sure how far we went, but there was also this element of where is the place for the heroic act, right? In relation to that. And I don't know if I gave this example or not, but it doesn't matter whether there is peaceful times. The role of a warrior, a kshatriya, samurai, is to constantly maintain good form, right? So, in fact, the fact that there is peace doesn't mean that one just, completely buries the sword and, grows essentially apples and forgets about the purpose that one is born, let's say, to protect. Of course, it's a metaphorical example, and it's a metaphor. But there is also saying that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a garden on a battlefield. So it is then translated into the job of a spiritual warrior, which also, in the kind of age we live in, lacking in understanding. So that we still have to go back to the upayas, and this is where, in my view, satsang movement and non-duality fell on its face, because it had the audacity to implement the highest no means upaya for every Tom, Dick and Harry, forgetting that that is completely inconsistent with how things are. So the attitude of a spiritual warrior here is precisely that. You see, you train, you maintain good form. Doesn't matter, peaceful times, people around doing the right things. Doesn't matter. The spill out of spiritual practices into the domain of householders, it's an interesting phenomenon. If we go back in time, then spiritual practices were not performed by householders. If we go back in time, there were monastic communities, little satellites, here, there, elsewhere, in different cultures, and they performed their role. Monks gather together, they meditate, they chant, they sing, they vocalize, and everything else happens then in accord with the dharma. Whether this is China, India, doesn't matter. Middle East, North Africa, Europe. But in our time, it seems that all this is kind of in that intermixture, in that fusion. There's not just a tremendous interest in spirituality, but there is this also awakening become more commonplace, more commonplace. How then it goes, it's a different story. So there is a possibility that because of the demographic explosion, because there are so many human physiologies, and this human physiology is all subject, of course, here is where a lot of things happen. A lot of things can happen. So, proportionately speaking, in Sufi tradition, there is the saying, 100 enlightened beings, the 100 keepers of light. They have to be maintained. It's most likely an allegory, rather than to be taken literally that it's a 100 person. But as the tradition speaks about it, it has to be maintained. So in other words, at all times, there's this 100 keepers of light. Once lifespan is extinguished, immediately it is being replaced. Now, maybe this belongs to 16th century perspective, 14, 12, I don't know, 19th century even. Exponential, right, explosion in population creates the possibility that for every city like size of, let's say, London, which is a multi-million city, there got to be quite few people who have to carry consciousness enough for everyone to enjoy, to maintain balance. It's simply inconceivable that it's only a handful of people get truly enlightened, awakened, and carry this consciousness, because then how can that maintain that balance? How can that balance be maintained? Who receives, you see? Who receives the offering? How the offering can be received? Meditation can be seen in so many different ways. And sometimes when people get kind of jaded and this and that, it's like, what really in meditation is one of the most superior and supreme forms of an offering. And through that offering, very subtle fields partake, subtle forms of energy, which otherwise do not receive. At the level of life we live in, at the gross level, like a lot of, let's say, energies receive. Anytime someone sells apples, there's exchange, pears, apples, potatoes, Cartier watch, Lamborghini, like there's this deal. There's some exchange of energy and some beings enjoy, receive, at some level, at some gross level. There's a lot of that at the moment, right now. Life is so rich in terms of its expression. Just look around. But these other levels of creation need to receive as well. Therefore, they have to be poets, they have to be artists. If every one of us will become a businessman, it's a kaput. It's the end of life. If all of us will become, there have to be Mozarts around. There have to be really creative vagabonds. So you're talking about swadharma, you see? There have to be those who whirl in ecstasy, so that that businessman who works at the stock market gets a little bit of something when he goes to sleep. Because we're all interconnected, completely interconnected. The saint and the criminal are just categories, all categories of awareness. You have to meet this halfway through, make step towards that understanding. Because it is in you where there is reconciliation take place. Only in you. So, I don't know exactly what was the take of Swami Vishnu Devananda Giri on the karma yoga in terms of receiving the Svadharma, right?
he said that in a meditation you can receive through a vision your swadharma.
Yes, this could happen. Of course it could happen. But I don't know why this is called karma yoga. Karma yoga, if we speak about it, how it is being spoken in the scripture which defines the karma yoga, the Bhagavad Gita, of which we spoke earlier, then karma yoga is the freedom from the binding influences of one's actions. So it's a freedom from identification that comes with acting, you see, with any action. So karma yoga, properly speaking, here has two, if you will, points of view. One is as a practice where one simply gives oneself to the practice of karma yoga, where one consciously forgoes any desire or hankering for the fruits of one's actions. One simply acts for the sake of action, not for the sake of the fruits that action brings. This is the rule of a thumb upon which karma yoga rests. So this is first, this is a prerequisite. This is where karma yoga is met. And at the ultimate level, or the level of actualization, karma yoga is gaining the witnessing state of consciousness. Because in witnessing state of consciousness, that prerequisite is automatically met. That prerequisite of remaining unattached to the fruits of one's actions. It doesn't matter what and how it sounds when one may, oh, I'm doing this, I hope it's going to be successful. If one is established at this level of consciousness, it's only at the level of how it's spoken of, but the internal experience is completely different. It makes no difference what will happen, how it will happen, because action is performed for the sake of action in a state of witness. You see? So, I don't know what other kind of takes on karma yoga, in a sense that receiving one's swadharma in meditation is seen as a real karma yoga. To me, this sounds a little bit complicated, because karma yoga is the beginning. Yogas unfold from karma yoga. The first yoga, we spoke about it before, is the yoga of despondency. Arjuna Vishada yoga is a yoga of despondency. So before the yoga can begin, there has to be this admonition that we've traveled that far, now we cannot go on our own devices. This is where Arjuna throws an act and puts, I'm not going to do it, right? Puts his weapon, sits down, I'm not going to fight. Because he's bewildered. It's despondency here, it's meeting the paradox where one cannot reconcile the calling of the duty, right? What one is born to do with what one feels is right. You see, it brings about that conflict. And that conflict results in despondency. Because I don't know what to follow. Do I follow my duty as a warrior and, enter the battle and just use my skills? But I also feel and see that this is completely pointless, and my heart swells, with compassion and an act of unrighteousness. Why do I want to do that?
Arjuna, at least he knew that he's a warrior, and this is a lot.
Well, earlier we spoke, you are a spiritual warrior. So, take this as an invitation, become professional about it, literally. From doing it on Sundays, playing, at some point, that's what really this is all about. You see? And I would then be inclined to say that then Svadharma will present itself in a natural way, just as I said earlier in London. Not everyone receives this download. Like, okay, you now go, and tell your people that you're going to take them through the Red Sea back into the land. Not everyone receives these commands, And not everyone receives like, okay, you're going to be, I don't know, you're going to be the next big film producer. Sorry, God, like, are you serious? Come on. Me, film producer? No. I don't want us to place this sort of like, we will receive this as a download. You see, this is, and also it's kind of creates this, karma yoga is karma yoga. Established in karma yoga is being established in witnessing state of consciousness, a cosmic state of consciousness. That's the fulfillment, that karma yoga is fulfilled here. But karma yoga is simply acting for the sake of action. And this is also what cultures this, if you will, cultures this, brings about the possibility where our action is freed from this hankering which reinforces this identity with an actor that constantly is being reinforced. It's like a deal making. That deal making keeps us prisoners to that what is spoken of as that, will of samsara, with karma being the main mechanism that makes the spokes of samsara to rotate. So the dilemma of receiving that Svadharma, as you have rightly pointed out, is very sign of our age, sign of our time. A lot of people are clueless of what to do with their life, especially if they, if you will, don't want to just follow on autopilot, like, right? We go a little bit back, a little bit more back in time, just a little bit, just 100 years ago, right? There was like this, like if you're born into a certain family, man, then you have to be either have military career or career of a lawyer or a doctor, right? So like men that choose between military, law, or be a doctor, like. Then, if whatever, depending on what strata of society. Yeah, of course, if you're born, somewhere on a farm, then you'll be a farmer. This is no longer the case. This is now the fusion spinning so fast, but all this has nothing to do with Svadharma. People are confused if they think that what they're doing defines in any way their purpose. People think, well, I'm going to do that, This is precisely what it is. It's the sign of our time, where one has to simply have this also degree of, if you will, courage, that one need to trust what one would like to do given the circumstances are favorable. In other words, this is where we invite that possibility of bringing about this, let's say, creation of our own reality, creation of our own dream. But then, of course, it's not getting lost in that daydreaming, if only. But there has to be this opening as well. I would love to do that if the circumstances were to allow me. But what I need to do right now maybe is completely, very little to do with it. But I have to do this. So do it at the level of karma yoga. Do it as a must. Simply go about your daily life with that attitude. Because you have to take care of yourself. Right? Because this is also the reality. So therefore I will never tell anyone to just start meditating 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day. It's irresponsible. I don't know, we had that discussion. People ask me, so if I meditate, more and more, will I be able to? No. It has to come spontaneously. The circumstances of our life has to fall in such a way that our sadhana can become the only and single focal point of our attention. It's a luxury. And it's not given to everyone. And one not always recognizes that. It takes a lot of courage. It's the same with any project. Spiritual project, why is it different? How many examples we know people invest their last penny in what they love doing, right? At the level of almost, if this does not succeed, then nothing is left to land on. But if this is their swadharma, that's what they're born to do. So therefore, one way or the other, I would not advise you to look for some kind of easy solutions or some kind of downloads or some kind of, just maintain what you need to do. You have the boss, you do something, do it. If you're completely fed up with it, then create an opportunity within yourself to open other possibilities in your field. And you'd be surprised what is possible at that very, very subtle juncture point where the intention has extraordinary power. Because when consciousness is enlivened, a lot of things possible. When consciousness is dormant, everything seems, only this is possible. When consciousness is dormant, is only this way you can go, that way you can go, that way you can go. In India, there is this saying, which, like, enlightened being does not go by the roads. And they go through the field. Even if it's like a cabbage grows there, they go. But whatever, they go straight. And you cannot tell them, like, so, hey, you're walking through my garden. It's like part of culture, I'm not saying that, kind of like trespass through someone's territory, like don't go to the, that's some territories are more guarded, Rottweilers, but okay. For a prolonged time, I did not know what I would do. For a very long time. And that came with knowing very well what I was doing before. So that it's kind of like, but there was this, because the breakthrough was so profound that there was no such thing as like, okay, well, you do this, I never recommend that to people unless they feel very strong sense that backing them up from within. I didn't have any one single person around me who actually supported that. People were like really telling me, like trying to straighten me up. You've got to like really, what are you doing on earth? What on earth are you doing? But whenever I would sort of like, maybe first couple of years, I simply couldn't do anything. Because the intensity of bliss was so profound that like this literally like doing, like going somewhere, doing something was impossible. Physically, virtually impossible. But then when the integrating phases begin to come, begin to sort of, there was more energy for other things, right? For interactions. And what would I do? I had no idea, no clue, and I was not interested in anything. in anything. So all I was interested in knowledge. Like if I have for breakfast scripture, then that's the best thing, like really take the whole book and, and that was there for sure. So somehow the guidance was always there, but I didn't know what I would do. I didn't know that I would hold space like this. I sincerely didn't. There was no inclination, no indication of that. And of course I postponed and kind of pushed it away for as long as I could. But I also have met people, a lot of people who did not know what to do and who went through these states of limbo completely. Because this, remember whenever we speak about unplugging and rewiring, it's part and parcel of that. And then new connections begin to be developed because we cannot live without these connections. So this rewiring, keeping good company, keeping satsanga, keeping good company, it what will naturally bring about, where your swadharma is. But in the meantime, you sharpen your sword, keep it sharp, okay? And practice these moves,